Well, hello and welcome to a guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and today we're going to be taking a little detour away from business strategy and talking about you taking care of yourself as the CEO of your law firm. There's nothing more important than making sure that you are sane emotionally, and also taking care of your physical well-being. And there's no better person to come and talk to you about strategies to help you focus on making sure that you're taking care of your body the right way and also fueling your mind the right way than our guest today, who is Tanessa Shears. Tanessa is the health consultant at Tanessa Shears Consulting. And she's a kinesiologist, which I had to ask her what that was, and somebody who studies movement, certified sleep science coach, and health consultant who helps entrepreneurs optimize their health, focus, and productivity through wearable technology, science-based strategies, and biohacking. She works closely with business owners to implement effective sleep, nutrition, movement, and stress resiliency strategies to eliminate brain fog and improve their overall well-being. Utilizing wearable technology and coaching, Tanessa helps optimize the performance capacity of her clients' bodies and brains, allowing them to produce more impactful work output and scale their businesses faster. Tanessa is also the host of the Becoming Limitless podcast, another podcast host. Awesome. Folks, you're listening to a podcast or you're watching this on YouTube. So if you're listening to a podcast, you know how to find another one. Hit that search button, check out the Becoming Limitless podcast, and check Tanessa out. Sharing her expertise on optimizing health and productivity for business success. Tanessa, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
As am I. And to be perfectly blunt and honest with you, I know that we're going to be talking about sleep in a few moments. I am one of those people who are an oddity in the real world. I maximize to my full potential at 4 hours of sleep. Now, sure, I can sleep for 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours given the opportunity, but I tend to run on about 4 hours of sleep on average, night to night. And my health coach thinks that I am insane. She thinks that I'm being unhealthy. But the reality is that with 4 hours, I feel fully energized and ready to go for the entire next day. So we can circle back to that when you're talking about sleep, because I am a rare bird, and you might be shaking your head and saying, oh my gosh, you're out of your mind. That's not good for you, but I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Let's see where it goes. But before we do that, what I like to do is very first thing when I bring a guest on, our audience doesn't know who Tanessa is. Give us a little bit of your backstory. I read the official bio, a little bit about what you do, but how did you get into this, and why is this the thing that lights you up and makes you passionate?
Yeah. So I opened my business in 2014 as a personal trainer. And that was so much fun, filled up really quick. Within like 15 months, we were at a 6-figure run rate. It built very quickly. And it got to the point where I was on the floor seeing 7-8 hours of clients back to back to back. And it was a very intense thing, like having to find, ways to work out in the spare time. And then you had to come home and do the admin work. And how do you eat when you're like between clients back to back? And it was a lot. And I was also seeing clients at this point, and they were originally coming to me because they're like, I want to get in shape. I want to, fit my jeans better. But it was, about a year and a half into this where I started noticing that a lot of my clients were entrepreneurs. And I was like, what is going on? What is specifically drawing you to me about this? And they're like, you know what, Tanessa, it originally, like I said, was about fitting in the jeans, but I can't get over how much better I'm sleeping. I'm so much more focused during the day. And then just naturally, as part of the entrepreneurial journey, you're always looking for how to get your clients better results. And so I began incorporating nutrition, right? And then figuring out how to help them optimize their energy and their focus with that. And then after my first daughter was born, I learned really quick how sleep can really derail most people in terms of their clarity, their ability to stay focused, not having that afternoon energy crash. And so over the years, it's become this kind of like big wellness practice, so to speak, in which I'm focusing on all the major pillars of like resilience and wellness that make us function so well as entrepreneurs. And so that's kind of how it's evolved to today. I no longer do personal training, but it's gone online. And now I serve clients all over the world, helping them really feel well rested when they wake up and ready to go.
Awesome. I love the story of how you got there, because, you know, we never know where our journey is going to take us. And even with, we work with lawyers every day, and we'll have a lawyer come into our world where they're a family law attorney, and through a little bit of exploration realize that they really want to be a personal injury attorney, or they're a practicing attorney and they realize that they want to own an online business and sell legal templates, or do some sort of coaching or consulting when it comes to their area of expertise. So it's always interesting to see somebody's journey of how they started in one place and ended up moving along the path to something that's more specific or more aligned with what they're, you know, where they're at in life. And as a father of 6, I can tell you that I know all too well what it's like to be a sleep deprived parent in the early days of you know, kids being really young. But even as kids are older, I know that when I didn't get enough sleep, and I mean less than my 4 hours that I talked about before, I will be shorter with my children. I will be less, you know, less patient and more trigger happy with the doling out the parental criticism, whether it's, you know, raising my voice or giving a timeout or things like that. And I can recognize that in myself after it's happened, not before it's happened, because, you know, then I feel bad as a parent, like it's really not their fault that I only slept 2 hours last night, and but I've just taken it out on them. And as a business owner, it really affects our performance, right? It affects our ability to be able to focus, concentrate, deal with others, have patience when it comes to others. Pain in the ass clients, much harder to deal with when when we're sleep deprived. So I love that that's what led you to this point. So let's jump in and talk about sleep. It's important. Why is it important? How does that work? And what are the effects of somebody who's not being careful with getting good, high quality sleep?
Yeah. So one of the hallmarks is waking up with that just general sense of like, oh, I'm so tired, I could sleep more. Obviously, that's a really big first one. But I find that the language that I'm often hearing from my clients are things like, oh, it takes me 2 cups of coffee and like this whole boot up process to get going. It's like, I can't function for the first couple of hours. But when you're in your own business, like you don't always have that option. Sometimes it's 6 a.m. you need to be getting to work. Sometimes we get a little longer. But beyond that, what happens is you go into your day and it maybe just feels like your brain's not as clear. You're experiencing that brain fog. And that I kind of like to experience brain fog as like, if you were imagine running on the beach and you know how it's just kind of ineffective, like you can go, but it's not as effective as if you're running on concrete. I like to think of brain fog as like thinking through quicksand or thinking through sand, so to speak. And it's not very efficient. It's a little slower. You know, you're just trying to come up with a word. You can't get the right groove. The sentences aren't flowing properly. I often find that is a lot of what is happening because our brain has not showed up to the day optimized and restored from the day's activities before. So just naturally, everything takes longer. And then that afternoon energy crash comes. And you know, the one, it's like everything else after that is just like, well, I can do admin work because that's about the brain power I have. And unfortunately, that just transitions into an evening where we are just so exhausted that the only thing we have the energy for is to crash on the couch and watch some TV. Now, I do love a good TV show, but I also want to be able to have the energy to go out for a walk, get a workout done, spend some time with my family. But I find if we're just kind of like escaping how tired we are at the end of the day with, TV or a glass of wine or whatever like that, it really starts to play into this whole just not showing up, feeling the way we want to feel. And the whole reason we're running these businesses is for time freedom and to, have this life we wanted to create. Now it's about feeling the way you thought that life would feel. And that doesn't come from hitting monetary milestones. Yes, that's something that's part of it, but how you feel we can control now. So I'm a really big fan of optimizing the way we feel now so that on the journey to the milestone feels just as good as when we get there.
Yeah, I'm wondering if any studies have been done on the financial effect for a business owner who is not who's sleep deprived, who's operating through this brain fog. But we can probably, assume or make some assumptions around what the cost might be. And it could be the difference between somebody being a $200,000 producer versus $1 million producer. Because when you want to produce at that high level, you have to be sharp at every moment of the day. It's not working more hours that's the key. It's making better decisions, and you can't make good decisions when you're not thinking clearly. So I definitely see the value of focusing on, on sleep as a key factor in our health and also our productivity. So if somebody they know that they're not sleeping well or enough, and actually that's a really good place to ask a question. What's the difference between sleeping well or sleeping enough? And which is more important, or is one more important when we start to look at fixing the problem?
Yeah, I love that you asked that, because that's exactly where I was going to go. It's a two-sided conversation. It is, are we getting enough sleep? And the reason we have that conversation is so that we can discern if we're sleeping enough time to get the quality of sleep we need. And this is interesting because it kind of ties back into your experience of like, I feel good. So I would be so curious. Do you wear any type of wearable sleep tracker, an Oura ring, anything like that?
No, I mean, I wear an Apple Watch, but I don't have any of the apps turned on to track my sleep.
Yeah. So it would be really curious to see if you were getting the amount of quality of sleep you need. So most people do need that 7 to 9 hours in order to get the adequate amount of quality of sleep. And when we're talking quality of sleep specifically, there's two major different types of sleep that we go through at night, and they have different functions in how we show up day to day and in our business. So deep sleep happens primarily in the earlier hours, and that is responsible for physical restoration. So if you did a workout that day, that's where you're getting the growth. Deep sleep is also fantastic for clearing out the brain of they call them proteins that accumulate on the brain. And if you don't clear these out at night, and they stack up long-term, that's when dementia comes in. That's when Alzheimer's comes in. So having that deep sleep keeps our brain sharp long-term. So if we're looking at the longevity of our business, we want to protect the quality of our brain now so that we don't end up in that predicament. On the other end of the night, so primarily in those early morning hours, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're getting the most of your dream sleep. That's called rapid eye movement sleep. And I think that this is essential for entrepreneurs for a bunch of reasons. During our dream sleep, studies have shown that that is where our creativity and problem-solving skills come from. So no matter what part of your business you're working in, your ability to solve problems is going to be directly related to the success of your business and the success of your clients. So if we can't think outside of the box, if we can't come up with creative solutions, that is to our detriment. And then to your point, what you were talking about is when you were feeling more irritable or were short-tempered with your kids, that is directly related to REM sleep. So I bet you on one of those nights, you might have been short on REM sleep, because what it does is lack of REM sleep affects our ability to have stable emotional presence. So whether it is, we're being emotionally stressed out by something, our ability to stay cool is enhanced through dream sleep. And then the last thing, which I think is really cool, is when we get enough dream sleep, our ability to read facial expressions and body gestures goes up. So honestly, no matter whether you're in a mediation session, no matter whether you're dealing with a team member, whether you're dealing with a client, my ability to read my clients' faces, my ability to watch their body language, do they understand? Do I need to re-explain it? Are they leaning in? Are they leaning back? That is what directly makes me good at my job and as a consultant, because I need to be able to read between the lines with my clients. So this, beyond just the fact that our thinking is faster during the day, getting the quality sleep keeps our brain sharp long-term and also creates the type of entrepreneur we are in terms of problem solving, emotional management, and, that social interaction piece.
That's incredible. So what is the right amount of each of these types of sleep?
Yeah. So the hallmark for deep sleep, we're looking at getting at least 60 minutes per night. Now, this is something that does decrease with age. So as we move through our 50s or 60s or 70s, our brains have trouble generating that deep sleep, which is why we want to cultivate so much of it as we're younger, because we want to prevent our brains from, aging prematurely. With dream sleep, we want to be looking at getting a minimum of an hour and a half each night.
So the reason that the average person needs to sleep between 7 and 9 hours is because they're only getting like 15 minutes of this. What was the first sleep called? The
deep sleep.
The deep sleep.
Yeah.
15 minutes of that deep sleep in every cycle, or every, is that what's happening?
Yeah. So on average, your brain goes through a cycle every 90 to 120 minutes. The first part of it is in deep sleep, and then it moves through dream sleep and then back through deep sleep. So the deep sleep phases are longer at the earlier parts of the night, and the REM sleep, the dreaming, is longer at the end of the night. So that's why that spectrum of sleep on both ends makes a really, I guess, a well-rounded sleep quality.
And you asked me about wearables before. So wearables are able to track this and therefore give us the data that we need to know what's broken in our sleep cycle. Is that where they come in?
Yeah. So, for example, I'm wearing a ring right now, and it's called an Oura ring, Oura. And what it does is it tracks a whole bunch of metrics from skin temperature to heart rate to the spacing between each heartbeat, as well as blood pressure, a lot of things like that. And it tracks it, and it uses a complex algorithm to determine, like, okay, heart rate has dropped and skin has cooled. This means we're in this phase. So it's able to assess, and it's the only device on the market right now that is validated against ECG, so heart rate data that's done with a proper electrocardiogram, and it can actually show you within a degree of error where you are and what kind of sleep you're getting. It's really neat.
Yeah, that is really really cool. I wonder how expensive it is. You probably know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they run about $299.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah.
Just another watch. No big
Yes,
deal.
totally it is. Yeah.
Okay, so I track my sleep. I'm getting enough of the deep sleep. I'm not getting enough of the deep sleep. I'm getting enough of the dream sleep. Now, you call it dream sleep. Is that because we dream during that sleep? So if I never dream, then I'm not getting dream sleep, or you can't make that correlation?
You might just not be remembering your dreams. So there's different things that can have us actually remember we're dreaming. And that's usually when you're like, oh, I was dreaming. And usually that is if you're woken up in the middle of a dream, either by, your brain has woken you up mid phase, or, you have a kid that's crying, a dog that's barking. You'll remember it during those times a lot more. But if you do pass through dream sleep back into light sleep before you wake up, chances are you won't remember it.
Interesting. So I was going to start asking you about how can you change things or fix things, but I'm actually curious about snoring. So I imagine that there's a lot of things that you can do to control the quality of your sleep, but what about our physical body? Like if somebody is snoring, does that affect their sleep, make it better or worse for them? Or is it the other way around? The snoring is kind of a byproduct of the sleep they're in, and maybe their snoring is worse during a deep sleep versus not deep sleep.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that can cause snoring, right? So number one is sleeping on your back obviously puts you at a much higher, you can call it a risk for snoring. Number two is if you've had alcohol, obviously that just relaxes the muscles around the throat. And three is if there is the presence of sleep apnea, which is a sleep medical condition in which you stop breathing temporarily throughout the night. So either of any of these can cause snoring. So when we're talking about our physical body, usually those that are sleeping on their side won't snore as much. Now, how does this relate back to brain health? Well, when someone is snoring, they're usually breathing in through their mouth, right? And mouth breathing has been shown to cause brain fog and improve impaired cognitive performance during the day. So one of the things, that's why it's so important to really assess some of these, and whether it's a change in sleeping position or getting, assessing some of the risk factors for sleep apnea, we're wanting to breathe in through the nose while we sleep. And there's actually, and a lot of people will hear this for the first time and think it's absolutely crazy, but in the community that I'm in, it's quite common. It's called mouth taping, or there is a certain type of myotape you can put across your mouth that stretches your mouth so it stays closed. And what this can do is actually train you to breathe through your nose at night, because your brain is much better oxygenated during your sleep when you're breathing in through your nose. So definitely it has an impact on the clarity of our thinking, a whole bunch of things during the day.
Now, is mouth taping only recommended for somebody who does not have sleep apnea, or it doesn't matter?
I would say it's recommended for anyone who is a mouth breather who wants to become a nose breather.
Got it. So you could even walk around with this tape on your mouth all day long, and
you could. I don't know how good that'd be for your
breathe through
business, but you could.
Yeah, hard to do podcast interviews with that, but
Totally.
But I think my wife might appreciate it.
Oh, are you the snorer or is she?
Oh, well, we both snore, but I'm definitely a snorer. No, but I think during the day, walking around with tape during the day, my wife would appreciate. I can't talk, and keep my mouth
twofold
shut.
benefit for her.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so let's assume that somebody has the Oura ring. They have the data now. They know where they're lacking or where they need help with their sleep cycles. They understand that if they improve this or fix this, it's going to change the way that they are during the day, increase their productivity, also have other positive health effects. What are the things that we can do to fix problems with our sleep?
So we would be looking, one of the things you can do is directly look at what component of sleep is struggling, so to speak. I mean, if we're not getting enough sleep, then we look at improving something called your sleep opportunity. So this was something that I had found out completely by accident. I originally had gotten a Fitbit back 5-6 years ago when I was pregnant, and I had used it at that time to figure out how many steps I was taking. But I didn't realize that when you're really pregnant, it's hard to take a lot of steps. And so I ended up figuring out what else that device was capable of, and it monitored my sleep. And I was one of those people that was like, I go to bed at 11, I wake up at 6, that is 7 hours, that is enough. But this device started showing me I was getting like 5 hours and 45 minutes of sleep. And I was like, what is going on? And what I didn't realize at that time, and one of the things that I do with my business is I look at the data from the Oura Ring for my clients. So I have seen data from hundreds of entrepreneurs at this point, and the average entrepreneur spends about an hour to an hour and a half of the time that they think that they're sleeping awake, because it takes time for our brain to fall asleep. There's the times that we're woken up in the middle of the night. There's the times we wake up to use the washroom, and the times where our brain is coming out of sleep in the morning. So if the first thing you're like, I just don't think I'm getting enough sleep, but you look at the clock and you do the math and it's 7 hours. But if we're just the average person, we're now sitting at 6, and we can start to see where over time that sleep deprivation accumulates. So the first thing I would ask is, okay, can we allow ourselves a little more opportunity to have that sleep? So that's where I would come at. That's the very first thing. But then I guess we can discuss some things in terms of like actually looking at deep and REM sleep. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that are very potent sources of information to our brain that we don't think about. And light is one of them. So we have this clock, our 24-hour clock that runs in our body, and it's called a circadian rhythm. Now, there are a ton of body systems that run by this clock. Like we have our heart rate increase at certain times of the day and our temperature at certain times of the day, hormones. It all functions very beautifully. Now, the only issue is when we are feeding our brain information that directly tells us that it's the middle of the day when we want to go to sleep, that's a problem. So if you think about like going outside in the middle of the afternoon, the light is bright, it is white. But when we want to go to bed, we want that light to be red and dim. Now, the problem is we spend a lot of times looking at our computers, looking at our phones, looking at our TVs. Now, this is feeding our brain information that it is daytime. And so we don't get that sleep supportive rise in melatonin, the hormone, the drop in heart rate, the drop in temperature. So it can throw off our ability to get good quality sleep. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to create what I call an indoor sunset, because pre-electricity, that's what used to tell our brain, hey, it's bedtime, we should start winding down. So I like to think about this, 3 simple changes. Can we turn off overhead lights within 2-3 hours of bed and turn on low table lamps? Can we switch on, either put the lights on dimmers or put on low wattage table lamps? And then can we switch it to orange and red hued bulbs at night instead of the bright fluorescent lights? So think about the light gets low, it gets dim, and it gets reds and oranges, just like what would happen with the sunset. And that information directly tells our brain, prep for sleep so that we can have good quality sleep. So that's definitely one of the big things that I would make a change on.
Okay. Are there other things that you can do, like drinking a tea or having a snack, not having a snack after a certain time or having a snack within a certain time? Like do those things affect the sleep, quality of sleep?
Yeah, great question. So as far as we talk about teas, if you were to take a decaf green tea in the hours before bed, it has something in it called L-theanine, which lowers blood pressure, it calms anxiety. It's a wonderful way to ease into sleep. And then chamomile is another type of tea, and it has something in it called apigenin, which has very similar calming effects. Now, these are great alternatives as long as they don't cause you to be waking up in the middle of the night to use the washroom. So you're going to want to make sure that they're spaced out appropriately from bed. Now, the food point that you mentioned is the most interesting. So I find that this is a huge shift in sleep quality that we can make. And generally, I recommend to finish food at least 3 hours before bed. And the reason for that is if you want your brain to be fully restored and rejuvenated going into sleep, you need your heart rate to drop to allow that to happen. But if we eat, our blood pressure has to go up, our heart rate goes up, everything has to go into digestion. And what happens is it delays the amount of time we get to spend sleeping in recovery because we're digesting. So if right now you're in that situation where you're like, I'm eating like 20 minutes before bed, I would experiment with moving it back by 30 minutes or an hour a week and start to see. And I find most of my clients experience that sweet spot at 3 to 4 hours out from sleep. If you remove food, the quality of sleep is better. There are reduced number of wake ups. It is just a much more cohesive sleep.
Wow, that is a lot of time before sleep to stop
Mm-hmm.
eating. Interestingly, so I said I'm an anomaly, and people are going to be like, what is wrong with this person? I hate him. I wish that he wouldn't share this, because some people have asked, like, well, how do you fall asleep so quickly? Because like I'll lay down, head hit the pillow, I'm sleeping. And then the interesting thing is that I drink a caffeinated cup of coffee before I go to bed, immediately before I go to bed, which it goes against anybody's recommendation, but I don't know. It doesn't affect me negatively as far as I can tell. Now, I am curious what would happen if I was wearing a ring and looking at the data, but I know from experience that it doesn't affect me. As a matter of fact, so I shared with you, I think in the pre-call, that I'm a paramedic here in Rockland County. So and I talk about this sometimes on the podcast, but one of the things that, when I went through my medic training, it was while I was going through a divorce. I was working full time in IT. It was a regular 40-hour-a-week job. Maybe it was closer to 60 hours a week, whatever it was. But then I was also taking the paramedic program, which is a 2,000 plus hour program in 1 year. So essentially, it's another full-time job. And I would leave work, go to class from 7 to 11, and then I would do an overnight rotation from 11 to 7. So I would, on the rotation, every opportunity I got, every time we had downtime, I would close my eyes and nap. What I found is that if I napped while I was doing that, when I needed to wake up because there was a patient to see or a call to go on, I was very sluggish when I got up. But if I drank coffee right before I napped, then when I woke up, I was wide awake when I woke up. And that's when I started drinking coffee before going to sleep, but I never stopped. I just enjoy coffee, and doesn't stop me from falling asleep. So I don't know if I've trained my body to do that or if I'm an anomaly, but just interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to kind of unpack in what you said there. One of the interesting things was, because I've definitely heard exactly what you say before, like I can have a coffee and go to sleep and it's not a problem. And what I've often found in reviewing data, and there's research to support this, is even though we can fall asleep, it doesn't mean it doesn't affect what we call the architecture of your sleep. So the amount of deep and REM sleep you get, because caffeine is really interesting. It occupies a receptor in the brain that would prevent a different chemical called adenosine from binding with it. And adenosine is one of those things that makes us feel sleepy, which is why it's so great, right? But it directly prevents us from being able to get that deep sleep as long as the caffeine is in our system. So I would be so curious as well, if you plugged into an Oura Ring, what the data actually said in terms of the quality of your sleep. And with regards to the nap hack that you found, that's something that was it a couple of years ago that you did that by any chance? Because that was kind of when
2006.
Oh, so a little more than that. That's kind of rose in popularity, I would say, about 4 or 5 years ago. And the whole premise was this: the caffeine kicks in by the time you're up from the nap. But you know what? The interesting idea that you could, somebody in this situation could try is, oftentimes the duration of the nap will directly correlate with how groggy you feel. Because remember how we talked about your brain goes through those sleep phases that are 90 to 120 minutes. In general, if you sleep longer than 10 to 20 minutes, you are going to be interrupting sleep phases, and waking yourself up during deeper REM is a recipe for feeling groggy. So what you could always do is alter 10-minute naps, 20-minute naps, and they do have a lot better effects on memory and all kinds of stuff like that than if they were stretched out a little longer.
I used to listen to Michael Hyatt. He had a podcast called This Is Your Life, which is no longer called This Is Your Life. Now he's got a new name for it, rebranded. He does it with his daughter. But he used to do it by himself. This is back in the days when I had to download the podcast to my iTunes and then sync it to my what was it, iPod, that we carried with us, and listened to it on that. But I distinctly remember he had an entire episode where he talked about napping and how important it is during the day. And he said that he had a couch in his office and he didn't want to sleep more than 20 minutes. So, but he also didn't want to set an alarm because sometimes it might take a little longer to fall asleep, and then the alarm's going off too early. So what he did was he took his keys and he put it in his hand, and he would go to sleep with his hand hanging over the edge of the couch. And when he fell asleep into that, and he started to cross into that deep sleep, his fingers relaxed, the keys would fall on the floor and wake him up. And that's what he did to make sure that he wasn't oversleeping into that deeper sleep cycle. So very interesting.
That's so interesting. Yeah. One of the hallmarks of deep sleep is actually loss of muscle tone. And so that would totally make sense why he would drop the keys. I love that podcast. I used to listen to it when he had that out. I do remember his napping in the afternoon.
So this has been a great conversation. And I'm sure that we can uncover a lot more, but we're unfortunately just at the end of our time together. So Tanessa, if we can do two things as we close this out. The first is, can you share with our audience how they can learn more about you, get in touch with you if this is something that they want to focus on? And then the second thing is, what is one parting piece of advice or wisdom that you want to share with our audience as we close this out?
Yeah, so as far as how to find me, my website, TanessaShears.com, has everything you need. There's even a free playbook on there called 12 Ways to Biohack Your Energy. They are all great ways to really foster energy, clarity, productivity in the morning. That's on my website there, as well as my podcast, as you said, Becoming Limitless. Definitely great options there. Parting wisdom. I think one of the things that I would emphasize when it comes to sleep is sometimes we get into this cycle of like, I'm just going to stay up later because I'll be more productive and I'll get more done. But I often find what ends up happening is the sleep quality and the effects of staying up later that night, whether it be from looking into screens or just having our brain active. A lot of people struggle to fall asleep, stay asleep. They're up during the night. I often find that while we think we're getting more productive time in, it often steals from productive time tomorrow. So what may have taken you 6 hours now takes you 8 hours to get done. So if you can shift that belief into prioritizing the best asset you have, which is your brain, and getting the best return on investment from that by optimizing it and showing up and having a fully productive day the next day, and you can take care of your health at the same time. I feel like that's, from a longevity perspective of your business and your health, the best way to kind of have the best of both worlds.
I love that. And this has been a great conversation. I can't wait to pick up my Aura Ring and look at my data because this has really started to make me question my own beliefs about what I've been doing and how healthy it is and how effective it is. I feel great. I feel fine, but maybe I can be even better. Who knows what a more sleep healthy Moshe could look like. I don't know. We'll find out. But really interesting stuff. And folks, if you enjoyed this episode and this was a topic that you'd like to hear more of, just reach out to our team. Let us know. You can actually do that by leaving a rating and review on any podcast player. Just put in there how awesome this specific episode with Tanessa was, and just say, I wish that they would do more of these, and my team will read those and we will definitely act on that. The other thing is if this was helpful to you, share it with a friend. To just hit the share button, grab the link for this podcast episode, or go to our website, profitwithlaw.com, and share that with a friend that could use this episode. Really appreciate you being here. We're here every Thursday with a brand new episode on the Profit with Law podcast. And we love having you here. We appreciate you listening and taking the time to be with us today, and can't wait to catch you again next week. Take care.